There's a certain kind of silence you only get this deep into the backcountry. It's not the absence of sound. It's the absence of anything human. No distant hum of traffic. No cell service pings. Just the creak of trees settling in the wind, the crunch of dry pine needles beneath your boots, and, occasionally, the low chitter of birds who've learned to live without company. I've worked in the wilderness for over a decade, and I've grown to prefer the company of moss-covered stones and crooked trails to most people. Out here, the rules are simple. Keep to your route, pack out what you bring in, and respect the land. The forest doesn't care who you are, only how you treat it. This section of trail hadn't been inspected in over a year. Most hikers avoided it. It was too far from the popular overlooks, too wild. Even the old trail markers were beginning to fade, swallowed by ivy and lichen. I liked it for that reason. Untouched, unpredictable, honest. I was about 5 miles in when I noticed something that didn't belong. The campsite was clearly abandoned. Someone had set it up in a rush, wrong side of the ridge for wind, far too close to the river. A single gray tent sagged under the weight of last week's rain. One pole snapped clean in half. No fire ring. No permit posted on the tree. No sign anyone had been here recently. It wasn't on any log either. I checked. No entry in the registry. No digital ping from a trail beacon. That was strange enough, but what made me pause was how still the whole area felt. Not calm. Stagnant. Like the forest had been holding its breath. The tent flaps were open, and a stiff breeze stirred the nylon just enough to expose the corner of something dark and leather tucked beneath a sleeping bag. I stepped inside. No sign of food. No stove. No buck. Just a few rumpled clothes and the journal. It was heavy in my hands, swollen from moisture, but intact. The cover was cracked and soft, weather-worn in a way that only comes from time spent under the elements. No name on the front. No identification on the inside cover. Just the first page, scribbled in tight handwriting. Day 1. Finally here. Just me and the trees. No signal. No noise. Perfect. A lot of folks come out here to escape something. Work, relationships, society. I don't judge. I flipped through the next few entries. The handwriting started steady. Neat little lines of trail observations. Meals eaten, birds spotted. Some drawings too. Ferns and fungi. Seemed normal enough. But about halfway through, something changed. The writing grew frantic. Slanted. Letters trailing into one another. The tone shifted from wonder to unease. Mentions of dreams that didn't feel like dreams. Whispers after dusk, just out of earshot. A sentence repeated several times over a few pages. They watch when the sun's low. There was a sketch, charcoal or graphite, of trees with long, spindly shapes peeking out between the trunks. Not deer, not bears. Humanoid but wrong. Disproportionate. Limbs too long. Eyes too many. The last few pages were harder to read. The entries devolve into single phrases, scrawled over and over. Don't follow the sounds. Don't look where the shadows gather. The trees are not empty. And then, on the final page, just 8 words, centered and underlined in trembling script. If you find this, it means I've become one of them. I closed the journal. The breeze had died, but I felt cold. My skin prickled the way it does when something is staring at you and you don't know where to look. I bagged the journal and surveyed the area again. No trash, no footprints, no trail leading away. Whoever left the tent hadn't come back. That much was obvious. But there weren't any signs of struggle either. No blood, no torn fabric, just stillness. By the time I got back to the station, dusk was slipping in. The mountains turn purple when the sun dips below the trees, and the air carries a bite that reminds you how far you are from the rest of the world. I logged the site and tagged it for follow-up. Left the journal on my desk. I planned to review it again in the morning, maybe skim a few pages. Officially, it'd need to go into the incident reports, but unofficially, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The drawings. That last line. I'm not superstitious. You can't do this job if you're going to jump at every cracked twig or hoot in the dark. But that night, something felt different. Off. It started with a sound. Faint at first, like someone calling in the distance. I muted the radio, leaned back in my chair. There was again a voice, a human voice, echoing through the trees just beyond the clearing. I stood, flashlight in hand, and stepped out onto the porch. The forest was dark, moonlight filtering through skeletal branches. I listened. The voice came again. It called my name. Not shout, it called. Familiar cadence, but just wrong. Too flat. Like it had been practiced, mimicked. The syllables were right, but the emotion wasn't. No urgency, no fear. Just a hollow, chilling imitation. Then came the rustling, just out of range of my light. Too quick to be wind. Too quiet to be an animal. Whatever it was, it knew my name, and it wanted me to know that it knew. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every tick of the clock, all of it felt louder. I checked the windows more times than I cared to admit. But nothing else came. No more voices. No footprints in the dirt. Just the stillness again. Like the forest had gone back to holding its breath. Waiting. Watching. The human brain is exceptionally good at explaining things away. Especially when it's tired, stressed, or alone in a place designed to play tricks on perception. I reminded myself of that on the hike back to the site the next morning, boots crunching across frost-laced underbrush, my pack loaded with gear I didn't need, but brought anyway. Habit. Or maybe it just felt better to carry something solid. I told myself it was probably an echo. Or maybe some lost hiker, someone panicking and calling out for help in the dark. These woods have strange acoustics. Sound travels farther than it should and bounces off the ridgelines in ways that can make it seem like voices are coming from nowhere. That had to be it. But even as I walked, I could feel the doubt rising in my gut like a cold bubble. The cadence of that call, it hadn't felt right. There was something too measured, too precise, like it had been shaped, not spoken. I reached the abandoned site just afternoon. The sun filtered through the pines and broken beams, turning the whole clearing gold. For a moment, it looked almost peaceful. The tent was still there, collapsed further from last night's wind. But when I pulled it open, I froze. The journal was gone. I knew I'd taken it. I remembered placing it on my desk before the night set in. But it wasn't in the cabin this morning. I checked. Twice. And now it wasn't here either. Maybe someone came back. Maybe I dropped it. Maybe, God forbid, I never brought it back at all. But I remembered the weight of it in my hand. The way the pages stuck together from damp. That final line burned behind my eyes. I hadn't imagined it. I couldn't have. There were no new tracks, no drag marks in the soil. Just the impression of the tent and a growing sense that the woods were playing along with the lie I was trying to tell myself. Back at the station, I spent an hour combing through the missing persons database. Nothing new. No recent hikers unaccounted for in our region. No park alerts. Nothing matching the campsite description or the time frame the journal seemed to hint at. I considered filing a formal report, but something stopped me. There wasn't enough. Just a ruined tent, a missing book, and a voice in the woods. No evidence. Just stories. And Park Services doesn't take kindly to stories without substance. Later that day, I stopped by one of the lower posts to check in with another ranger who'd been on this stretch longer than me. He was older, one of those types with skin like sun-baked leather and a way of speaking in half-thoughts, like he was always leaving the rest unsaid. When I mentioned the area, just vaguely, just in passing, he paused. His face tightened in a way I hadn't seen before. He said something about bad bearings, how some places pull you off the map, no matter how careful you are. Then he muttered a phrase I'll never forget. Some places are better left unchecked. And then he walked away, just like that. That night, I stayed up late. Couldn't help it. The wind had picked up and the trees outside moaned in that mournful, ancient way they sometimes do. It's a kind of song, the forest wind. You learn to sleep through it eventually. But not that night. It was close to 2 a.m. when I heard it again. Not a scream this time. It was a voice. My voice. Calling out from the edge of the tree line. Not to me, as me. The exact pitch. The same breath between syllables. A perfect, terrifying mimic. It called out once, paused, then again like it knew I was listening. Like it was waiting for a reaction. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My own heart sounded foreign in my ears. The voice faded back into the trees, swallowed by the rustling of branches, like it had never been there at all. The next morning, I checked every inch of the clearing around the cabin. That's when I found it. Roughly 2 miles off trail, down a path I didn't remember ever clearing, something caught the light. A flash of reflection between trunks. I approached slowly, hand on the flare, strapped to my belt, breath fogging in the cold. It was a mirror, a rectangular shard of glass, about the size of a license plate, nailed into the bark of a pine tree at eye level. There was no reason for it to be there. No hiking group, no backwoods art project. Just that sheet of glass, clouded at the edges with age, and something was scratched into it. Not etched with a tool, but gouged, deep and erratic, like someone had done it with a jagged stone or their bare nails. For words, uneven but unmistakable. Watch yourself. I stared at it for a long time. The reflection stared back. I looked tired, pale, like someone I recognized but didn't know. The kind of look a photograph gives you when it's been sitting face down in a drawer for years. I left the mirror where it was. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Back at the station, the unease clung to me like wet clothes. I tried reading, tried distracting myself with paperwork, even turned on the old radio just to hear static fill the silence. When I stepped outside near dusk, I found them. Footprints, dozens of them, circling the perimeter of the cabin. Not boot prints, bare feet, human-shaped but wrong. Too long, too narrow at the heel. Toes that pointed inward, like whatever left them had never learned how to walk like a person should. They didn't lead anywhere. Just looped the building again and again in a widening spiral. No dirt on the porch. No smudges on the doorknob. Just those prints, fading slowly with the thaw, like they'd been there for hours. Watching, waiting. I didn't sleep that night, either. Not because I was afraid of what was out there, but because I was starting to wonder if maybe whatever it was had already gotten in. It started with small lapses. A few seconds here, maybe a minute there, time lost between blinks. I'd find myself standing in the middle of a room I didn't remember walking into or realize hours had passed without a single recollection of what I'd done. At first, I chalked it up to exhaustion. Sleep had been fitful, punctuated by strange sounds and half-dreams I couldn't hold onto when the sun rose. The mind plays tricks when you're running on fumes. But then came a morning I woke up in the woods. Not on my bunk, not on the couch, flat on my back in the dirt, staring up through a canopy of trees I didn't recognize. The sun had barely crested the ridge, casting long shadows that made everything feel more distant than it was. My boots were soaked. My fingers, stiff with cold, were caked in earth. I was a mile and a half from the station, with no flashlight, no weapon, no radio. Just me, and the silence. I couldn't explain it. My keys were still clipped to my belt. My clothes weren't torn. There were no injuries, no bruises on the back of my head. Just a dull pressure behind my eyes, like the ghost of a migraine. I followed my own footprints back through the dew-slick grass. At first, they were erratic, circling, doubling back, pausing mid-stride. Then they became steady, deliberate, a straight line, like I'd known exactly where I was going. But I didn't. At least, I didn't remember it. That day, I decided to check the trail cams. We have a handful scattered across the ridgeline and fire roads. Motion trigger cameras used to monitor wildlife, check for unauthorized campers, or catch the occasional wayward hiker. I hadn't pulled the footage in weeks. Most of it is just empty frames and squirrels. The first few SD cards turned up nothing unusual. Then, around the fifth camera, an old unit near the split in Pine Ridge, I found it. Footage from 2:03 a.m., time-stamped and clean. There I was, walking along the trail. Slow, steady steps, eyes wide open. But the way I moved, it didn't feel like me. My posture was slack, limbs swinging just a little too loose. Like a puppet with strings slightly tangled. I wasn't carrying a flashlight. I didn't seem to notice the cold. My eyes never blinked. And I wasn't alone. I was looking at something. Someone, just ahead of me. My gaze never shifted. I followed, unwavering. But the camera didn't catch anyone else. Just me, trailing an invisible figure into the trees. I must have watched it a dozen times. Frame by frame, searching for any sign. A shadow, a blur, a reflection. But there was nothing. Only me. And the wind stirring the branches like fingers brushing along the ceiling. The next night, I bolted the cabin door, checked every window, kept the lights on until morning. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that footage. My face. Those blank, lifeless eyes. The next morning, When I dragged myself to the desk to catalog the footage, I found something that stopped me cold. There was a journal sitting beside the coffee mug I'd left there the day before. Same size, same cracked leather cover. For a second, I thought it was the original. Maybe I misplaced it somehow. But when I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was the same journal, same entries, same drawings. But the name at the front? Mine. My name, scrawled in my own handwriting, as clearly as anything I'd ever written. Not the campers. Not anonymous. Mine. Every word in the journal matched what I remembered reading. Every line, every odd phrase, every frantic scrawl. All of it was there, but now attributed to me. And at the bottom of the last page, the one I remembered so vividly, the phrase was there again. If you find this, it means I've become one of them. Only this time, the ink was fresh, smudged like it had only just dried. I closed the journal, left it on the table, paced the room until my feet ached and my nerves were too raw to keep going. When I finally opened it again, half hoping it would be gone, the entries had changed. There were new ones. Entries I hadn't written. Events that hadn't happened. Yet, it described waking in the woods with no memory. Finding a mirror nailed to a tree. Discovering footprints around the cabin. I flipped ahead. The next entry described finding a dead animal. Antlers broken, eyes missing, laid neatly at the cabin's doorstep. That hadn't happened. Not yet. But when I stepped outside, heart hammering in my throat, I saw the shape through the trees. A body. A deer. Perfectly still. Its head rested in the center of the path, propped upright against a cairn of smooth stones. Antlers snapped clean at the base. The eyes were gone, sockets hollow and dark. Its legs folded beneath it, as if it had been placed there like a gift. Or a warning. The journal knew. Or something new through the journal. I didn't sleep that night, either. I sat at the desk with a pen in hand, flipping through the pages, trying to make sense of it. The entries ahead grew stranger, describing things that made no rational sense. Paths that folded in on themselves, faces and reflections that didn't match the body, voices coming from the soil. But the most disturbing entry was the one dated for tomorrow. It described waking up in the middle of the station, surrounded by mirrors. Every wall reflecting back a version of myself. Each one blinking at different intervals, each one whispering different words. The entry ended with a line that made me physically recoil. I'm not sure which one is writing this. I slammed the book shut. My handwriting was still on the page. I hadn't written it. I couldn't have. But part of me, the part that hadn't been sleeping, hadn't been thinking clearly, wondered if that was still true. The forest remembers. I just wasn't sure if I did. It was around dusk when I saw myself on the trail. The sun had started to dip below the ridge, painting the treetops in rust and crimson. I was checking a northern fire break, one I'd walked a dozen times, when I caught movement ahead. Just for a second, a figure ducking behind the trunk of a pine, about 50 yards up. Not unusual. Could have been a hiker who'd lost the trail. But then the figure stepped out. Same height, same stance, same khaki green jacket and dull brown pack. The hat was even tilted the way I wear mine, brim slightly curled. And the face, though mostly in shadow, was mine. Not just similar, not just close. Exact. There was no fear in its posture, no surprise at being seen. It simply turned and walked deeper into the trees without a sound. I ran. The branches lashed at my arms, brambles catching on my sleeves. My breath burned in my chest, boots thudding over uneven roots and damp earth. But when I reached the place it had been, there was nothing. No figure, no trail, no sound but the wind. Not even footprints. The soil should have taken impressions. It was soft, damp, but it was untouched, as if nothing had passed through it all, except me. I stood there, panting, hands on my knees. The trees seemed to lean in closer, watching, listening, like they had been expecting this moment. Later, I couldn't remember the walk back. The miles vanished beneath my boots. 1 minute, I was in that hollow, heart racing. The next, I was unlocking the cabin door, hands trembling so hard I dropped the key twice. That night, I pored over the journal again, fingers smudging the pages with sweat. I skimmed over the entries I'd already memorized and found myself staring at one I didn't remember seeing before. The handwriting was the same. My own. It described seeing a figure in the woods that looked exactly like the writer. It described the chase, the sudden vanishing, the absolute certainty of recognition. And then the line that stuck with me like a thorn under the skin. The forest doesn't kill you. It replaces you. I read it again and again. The words blurred. My thoughts began to tangle. Was I the one who chased the double, or the one who was chased? I needed air. I left the cabin, flashlight in hand, unsure of where I was going. My feet followed instinct, not logic. I passed trail markers I didn't recognize, turned at bends I would have sworn didn't exist the week before. Eventually, the path opened up into a clearing I had never seen. No record of it on the map, no mention from other rangers. It was silent, not in the way the forest usually is, but as if sound itself had been pulled out of the air and buried. At first, it looked like someone had built cairns, stacked stones, and driftwood, but as I stepped closer, I saw them for what they really were. Totems. Twisted shapes of bark and bone, bound with twine, hair, and what looked like bits of fabric, some stained, some charred. They rose like skeletal trees, each one different, but all pointing inward toward the center of the clearing, where something dark was folded over itself on the ground. I approached slowly, every step feeling like it took longer than the last. In the middle lay a torn ranger uniform. The name tag was still attached. It was mine. The shirt had been slashed through, faded with weather and age, but the letters were clear as glass. I reached out, but something in me recoiled before I could touch it. My own name stared back at me from that patch of fabric like it was no longer mine to claim. I left it there. Back in the cabin, the journal waited for me. I didn't want to open it, but my hands moved before I could stop them. The pages turned with a will of their own. I landed on a passage I hadn't seen. No date, no heading. Just one phrase, circled again and again. To become one of them is not to die. Below it, an entry described the forest taking pieces. Not all at once. Little fragments. A memory misfiled. A name forgotten. A moment repeated out of order. The body remained, but the identity frayed. I read it all in my own handwriting, even the parts one didn't remember writing. The next day, I tried to reach the other rangers on the radio. Static answered me at first. Then came a burst of voices, concerned, confused. They were looking for me. Said I hadn't checked in. Said I'd missed 3 days of patrol. One of them even mentioned I'd left my cabin unlocked and empty. But I'd spoken to them yesterday. I remember the call. I remember the words. Didn't I? The forest didn't feel like a place anymore. It felt like a mirror with 1,000 cracks, each one showing a slightly different version of reality. A trail I knew would lead somewhere unfamiliar. A stump I'd passed dozens of times now sat on the opposite side of the path. Even the air smelled different, sweeter somehow like rot and sap. I decided I had to leave, just long enough to breathe somewhere that wasn't pressing in on all sides. I loaded my pack, marked the door with a chalk X, checked the map, followed the roads, and that's when the loop started. I drove 10 minutes before noticing the same broken tree I'd passed at the beginning of the route. I kept going. 15 more minutes. Again, the same tree, same split down the middle. Same crow perched on the broken limb, staring as I passed. I turned back, took a different road, a fire access lane that led straight out of the forest. Another 15 minutes. Same tree, same crow. The GPS was no help. It showed me moving in circles even as I drove straight. Every route returned to the same spot, like the woods were folding around me. I stopped trying after the third loop. Shut off the engine and listened to the silence pressing against the windows like fog. This place didn't want me to leave. Maybe it never had. And as I sat there, staring at my own reflection in the glass, pale, sunken, unfamiliar, I realized something else. It wasn't just trying to keep me in. It was trying to make me forget I'd ever been anywhere else. The nights no longer felt separate from the days. Time had begun to dissolve, blending, folding in on itself like wet leaves pressed into the soil. I tried to hold onto a sense of routine, eat, sleep, patrol, but the days repeated like echoes, each one more warped than the last. I would wake in unfamiliar places, sometimes in my bunk, sometimes on the cabin floor, once at the edge of the river with damp clothes and dirt-stained palms. My reflection in the window would greet me with a delay, blinking after I did, tilting its head a second too late. The journal stayed beside me, always open to the page I feared most, ink smearing like blood and water. I could no longer tell which thoughts were mine and which were borrowed. At night, dreams came in fractured loops, trees unfolding like lungs, voices crawling from the dirt, 100 eyes opening inside the bark. Sometimes I dreamed of walking endless trails, only to see myself at the other end, watching, waiting. Then, one morning, or perhaps night, it made no difference anymore. I found it. The clearing was new, but also not. A familiar wrongness clung to it, the way a song feels when played in reverse. The trees leaned in tighter than before, and the wind held a low hum, like breath caught in the throat of the woods. There, propped against the base of a wide, blackened pine, was a body. Still, upright, as if posed. It wore a weathered hiking jacket, mud-caked boots. A thick layer of moss had begun to gather along the sleeves. The skin was sallow, stretched tight over sharp features. In one hand, stiff with decay, was the leather-bound journal. I stepped forward, knees trembling. The figure's chin rested against its chest. A tangle of hair obscured the upper face. I knelt slowly and reached out, parting the strands. My own face looked back at me, mummified, eyeless, lips parted slightly in a half-smile, as if some long-lost punchline still echoed in the skull. The journal slipped from its fingers as I stepped back. I ran, not out of fear, but because for the first time in weeks, I knew something with absolute certainty. I had seen the beginning of this. The face, the journal, the line at the end. It had never belonged to a camper. It had always been me. I don't remember how I found my way back to the mirror tree, only that I arrived at dusk, the sky a flat gray dome, colorless and dull. The mirror was still there, nailed tight into the pine, its surface warped with age and weather. But this time, my reflection didn't follow me. It stood still, watching. I lifted a hand. The reflection did the same, but slower, hesitant, like it wasn't sure if it was supposed to mimic me anymore. Then it blinked, out of sync, and smiled. I didn't. Behind me, in the reflection, something moved through the trees. Tall, silent, dozens of them, just barely distinguishable from a bark. Shadows unpeeling themselves from trunks. Watching, waiting. I left the mirror behind. When I got back to the cabin, the air inside felt heavy, pressurized. The journal sat open on the desk again, even though I'd left it behind with the body. Pages fluttered despite the stillness. My handwriting now filled nearly every line. Entries I didn't remember writing. Descriptions of things I hadn't yet seen. Or maybe I had. I picked up the pen. The words came easily, without thought or effort. Muscle memory, maybe, or something deeper. The line that had haunted me since I first read it flowed from the pen like water from a cracked pipe. If you find this, it means I've become one of them. I stared at the sentence, not as a warning, but as a truth. There was no fear now, only stillness. A strange calm I couldn't explain. Later, I heard movement outside, twigs breaking, something stepping carefully onto the porch. Boots. A voice, young, unfamiliar, called out. Nervous, eager. A new ranger, probably. First day on the job. Maybe sent to check on me after too many missed calls. The door creaked open. Light spilled into the room. Footsteps crossed the threshold. And the last thing I saw before the world went quiet again was their hand reaching toward the journal. Ready to read, ready to begin.